Before sunrise, behind a scorched Arizona truck stop, the heat was already crawling off the asphalt like something alive. The desert never slept, and neither did Echo. She stayed wedged between dented dumpsters, knees pulled tight, surviving the only way she knew how, by staying invisible. 5 months on the street had taught her that unseen meant alive. From the shadows, she watched a Phoenix cop shove a teenage boy into a brick wall hard enough to knock the breath out of him. The officer was clean-cut, confident, decorated. Cole. The kind of man people trusted without question. The boy wasn't fighting back. Blood ran from his lip as the cop pressed a badge into his chest and leaned in close. "Open your mouth, and you're dead." Cole promised foster care, prison, or worse, disappearance. Echo felt the words hit her like a fist. She had aged out of the system. She knew how kids vanished without paperwork or noise. The boy? Echo's hands trembled around a cheap, disposable camera. 90 seconds. That was all she had to choose between staying invisible or becoming a target. The flash fired. Cole snapped around. Boots hit pavement. Echo ran. Sirens wailed somewhere close, and the night held its breath. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. If you're liking this story, hit subscribe. Jax Hawk. Ryder carried authority the way other men carried weapons, without flash, without noise, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. As vice president of the Hells Angels Phoenix Charter, Hawk didn't need to raise his voice or posture for respect. It followed him naturally, riding in with the dust on his boots and the sun-baked lines etched into his face. His skin told stories of desert miles and long roads, and his posture was iron straight, as if weakness had never found a place to land. Hawk measured threats the same way he measured men, slowly, carefully, never twice. Around the club, his reputation was carved into stone. Protect family at all costs, keep your word even when it hurts, and finish what you start. When Hawk stood up, conversations stopped. When Hawk moved, brothers followed without asking why. Ridge Ryder was barely into his teens, but he carried his father's spine. Sharp-eyed and stubborn, Ridge had learned early that silence was sometimes safer, but not always right. He was brave in the quiet ways, the kind of brave that didn't announce itself until it mattered. That bravery was what put him in danger. In the outlaw world, hurting a child was a line that could not be uncrossed, and Ridge stood as the story's moral fuse. What happened to him wasn't just personal. It was a violation of code, of order, of something sacred that even the most hardened men protected without hesitation. Echo had spent most of her life learning how to disappear. At 19, she had already aged out of foster care, bounced through homes that never stuck, and landed on the street with nothing but a backpack and rules for survival. Stay unseen. Don't trust, don't ask. Living between alleys and truck stops had sharpened her senses. She noticed everything, footsteps, voices, patterns, because observation was her armor. Patience kept her alive, but refusal to look away changed her fate. Echo wasn't strong in the way movies portrayed strength. She was strong because she endured, because she remembered, and because when it mattered most, she chose to act. She became the catalyst, not by wanting to be brave, but by refusing to let another kid vanish the way so many others had. Cole wore his uniform like a shield, and his badge like a weapon. To the city, he was a decorated Phoenix cop, clean record, commendations on file. To those who knew better, he was a predator hiding in plain sight. Cole understood the system intimately, which made him dangerous. He planted evidence, coerced witnesses, and exploited the foster care pipeline because he knew no one was watching closely enough. Children were easy targets. Runaways were disposable. He believed the uniform made him untouchable, and for a long time, he was right. His confidence came not from courage, but from knowing how rarely monsters were challenged when they looked respectable. Father Iron, president of the Hells Angels Phoenix Charter, was the counterweight to chaos. Age had slowed his body but sharpened his mind. He had seen enough violence to know when it solved problems and when it only created new ones. Calm under pressure, Father Iron turned rage into plans and grief into discipline. He believed in winning clean enough to survive what came after. Under his leadership, the club didn't act on impulse. They acted with purpose. Church meetings weren't about noise or threats. They were about strategy, loyalty, and protecting the club without betraying its code. Wire was the quiet hum beneath the operation. Tech-savvy and methodical, he handled evidence the way others handled guns. Photos, money trails, digital backups. Wire made sure truth couldn't be erased. He trusted data more than words, and redundancy more than luck. If something mattered, it existed in more than one place, protected and ready. Doc was the club's caretaker, a former combat medic who had seen bodies broken in ways most men couldn't imagine. She didn't ask questions that didn't need answers. She cleaned wounds, treated shock, and restored people piece by piece. With Echo, Doc did more than patch up sunburn and dehydration. She reminded her what safety felt like, what dignity felt like. Gravel, once a federal prosecutor, now served as the club's legal blade. He understood the law well enough to know how to cut with it. Gravel didn't chase revenge. He designed outcomes. His job was to make sure enemies fell in ways they couldn't climb back from. Phoenix, Arizona wrapped all of them in heat and tension. Dust hung in the air, neon lights buzzed through the night, and asphalt shimmered like a warning. Truck stops, hospitals, clubhouses, and police precincts formed a city of pressure points where violence always felt one breath away. Brotherhood wasn't spoken aloud. It was shown in who stood guard, who stayed late, and who never walked away when someone bled. Echo had seen a lot of ugly things in 5 months on the street, but nothing that made her stomach go cold the way this did. The truck stop sat like a lonely island on the edge of Phoenix, lights humming, diesel fumes hanging low, and the desert heat already rising off the asphalt even though the sun hadn't cleared the horizon. Echo stayed behind the dumpster enclosure because it was a blind spot. Trucks rolled in and out. People minded their business. Nobody looked twice at the trash. That was the rule out here. Don't look. Don't get involved. Don't become part of the story. Then she saw the boy. He was young enough that his shoulders still had softness to them, but old enough to carry defiance in his stance. He was backed against a brick wall near the service entrance, trapped between a soda machine and the shadow of a patrol car. The cop had him pinned with one hand on his collar like he weighed nothing. The officer's uniform was pressed and perfect, boots polished, hair clipped neat, the kind of lawman who looked like a poster for serve and protect. Echo couldn't hear everything over the idling trucks, but she could read the posture. This wasn't a conversation. This was an execution with paperwork. The boy tried to turn his head away, and the cop slammed him harder into the wall. The crack of bone against brick cut through the diesel noise like a gunshot. The boy's breath burst out in a wet gasp. His hands came up instinctively, not to fight, just to shield. Echo's throat tightened. Her whole body told her to disappear deeper into the shadows, to become air. She started to back away. And then the cop leaned in close enough that Echo saw the way his mouth curled, like he was enjoying it. He pressed his badge into the boy's chest, hard, grinding it in like a brand. Echo caught the words this time, clear as day. You open your mouth, and you're dead. The boy's eyes flared. He swallowed hard, trying not to show fear. The cop spoke again, lower, colder. He talked about foster care like it was a weapon, like he could drop the kid into that machine and let it chew him up. He talked about charges that could be written with a pen and made real with a signature. Possession. Assault. Resisting. Whenever he needed. Echo knew those words too well. She'd heard them used on kids who didn't have parents to show up in court. She'd watched social workers stop returning calls. She'd watched case files disappear into cabinets like graves. The worst part wasn't the threat. The worst part was the confidence behind it. Cole wasn't bluffing. Echo didn't know his name yet, but she knew the type. A man who understood exactly how powerless some people were. A man who picked his victims based on how easy it would be to erase them. The boy's lips split when he spoke back. Something short, something brave, something that made the cop's eyes sharpen. The officer's free hand moved, and Echo flinched before the strike even landed. Palm across the mouth, fast and vicious. The boy's head snapped sideways. Blood spattered the wall. Echo's pulse went wild. Her fingers curled around the cheap disposable camera tucked in her backpack, the last thing she owned that could prove she existed. It wasn't much. It was plastic and flimsy and older than her, but it had one thing the world respected when it came from the right angle. Proof. Echo told herself to stay hidden. That was the rule. That was survival. If Cole saw her, he wouldn't just chase her off. He'd do what men like him always did. He'd turn her into a problem. He'd make her disappear and nobody would care, because nobody cared when a foster kid vanished. But she couldn't stop staring at the boy's face, at the way he tried to keep his knees from shaking, at the fact that he was still standing. Echo's mind flashed back to a group home kitchen, cheap fluorescent light, a counselor telling her to stop making trouble. Flashback to a caseworker saying, "You're almost 18, you'll be fine," like being fine was automatic. Flashback to the day she aged out, got handed a paper bag of clothes and a bus pass, and the suggestion that she should be grateful. That was what Cole was threatening this kid with. Not just pain. Obliteration. Echo's hand shook so hard the camera rattled against her palm. She lifted it anyway, slow, careful, trying to stay behind the metal edge of the dumpster enclosure. Her eye pressed to the viewfinder. The frame caught the cop's profile, the badge, the boy's pinned body, and something else. Cole's other hand, half hidden, accepting a folded bundle from someone Echo couldn't fully see. Cash, maybe. Or something worse. Echo swallowed hard and clicked the shutter. The first shot was shaky but usable. She clicked again. And again. Each photograph felt like lighting a match in a gas station. On the fourth shot, the flash fired. A bright white burst against the dark. It was like the world shouted her name. Cole's head snapped around, fast enough to be animal. For half a heartbeat, his eyes searched the shadows, hunting the source. Echo froze, heart hammering so loud she thought it might give her away on its own. Cole stepped away from the boy, his hand drifted toward his belt. Not casually, not as procedure. Like a man who'd done this before. Echo moved. She didn't run at first. She slipped sideways, trying to keep the dumpster between her and his line of sight. But her shoe scraped gravel, and Cole's face turned sharper, locking on. "Hey!" His voice cracked through the morning air, commanding, dangerous. Echo ran. She sprinted into the maze of parked trucks, where steel bodies loomed like walls, and the air smelled of hot rubber. Her lungs burned. Her backpack slammed against her spine. Behind her, boots pounded pavement. Cole was fast, fueled by fury and the certainty that she didn't have the right to challenge him. Echo dodged between a refrigerated trailer and a fuel pump, nearly slipping on spilled diesel. Her mind raced with every way this could end. He could catch her. He could plant something on her. He could break her and call it resisting. He could drag her into the car and nobody would ever know where she went. She cut hard toward the darkest gap she could find, and dropped low, crawling under the belly of an 18-wheeler. The metal undercarriage was hot and greasy, and she scraped her elbows on the rough gravel. She squeezed into the narrow space near the rear axle, pressing her body flat, trying to become nothing. Cole's boots stopped near the truck. Echo saw his shadow stretch across the ground. For a second, she thought he'd kneel down and look. Then a radio crackled. Dispatch. A call. Domestic disturbance. Immediate response. Cole cursed under his breath. Echo held her breath until her chest felt like it would split. The shadow shifted. Boots moved away. The patrol car door slammed. The engine started. Echo didn't move until the sound faded into the distance. When she finally crawled out, her hands were filthy and shaking. Her whole body felt wrong, like she'd stepped off the edge of something and hadn't hit the ground yet. She should have left. That was the smart choice. That was survival. But then she heard it. A small sound, broken and raw. Crying. Echo turned back toward the brick wall. The boy was crouched down on the curb now, one hand pressed to his mouth, shoulders hunched tight like he was trying to fold into himself. Blood ran between his fingers. He looked smaller without Cole towering over him. Echo's feet moved before her mind finished arguing. She approached slowly, keeping her hands open, camera clutched tight like it was her last lifeline. The boy looked up, eyes wide and furious and scared all at once. For a heartbeat, Echo expected him to run from her too. You saw that," he rasped. Echo nodded. "Yeah." He swallowed and winced. He said he'd put me back in the system. Echo's jaw clenched. He will, if he can. The boy's eyes narrowed. You took pictures. Echo lifted the camera just enough to show him. I did. The boy stared at it like it was a weapon. Then he whispered, My dad can help. Your dad? Echo asked, even though she already suspected the answer. The boy's voice steadied as he spoke the name, like saying it made him feel less alone. Jax, Hawk Rider. Echo didn't know club politics. She didn't know rank structure, but she knew the Hells Angels patch. Everyone in Phoenix knew it, even if they pretended they didn't. And something about the way the boy said his father's name carried weight like a door had just opened into a world Cole couldn't control. Echo hesitated only long enough to taste fear again. Walking into a room full of patched bikers wasn't exactly safe for a street girl with nothing. But neither was leaving the kid alone after what just happened. Where is he? Echo asked. The boy pointed with a shaking hand toward the truck stop lounge. Echo helped him stand. His knees wobbled, but he refused to lean on her. Pride. Hawk's spine, like she'd thought. They crossed the parking lot together, every step feeling like walking into the mouth of a storm. Inside the lounge, the air was thick with coffee, grease, and cigarette smoke. A handful of men sat in booths, leather vests heavy on their shoulders, patches like warnings stitched onto their backs. They weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Their presence filled the room like pressure. One man stood when he saw the boy. Not rushed, not panicked. Just instant, controlled movement. The kind that meant danger was now organized. Echo didn't have to be told who he was. Jax Hawk. Ryder looked at his son's blood and bruises, and something in his face shifted. The warmth of a father vanished behind a harder expression, a cold focus that made the air feel thinner. Ridge's voice cracked. Dad? Hawk crossed the room in 3 steps. He cupped his son's jaw gently, checking the damage, eyes scanning every bruise like he was memorizing the details for later. Then Hawk's gaze lifted and landed on Echo. Echo felt exposed under that stare, like he could see every hungry night and every fear she'd swallowed whole. She lifted the camera with both hands and held it out. I saw it, she said, voice steady only because she forced it. I got proof. Hawk took the camera like it was sacred, not plastic. His fingers closed around it, careful. He looked at Echo again, and this time he understood exactly what she'd done. She'd made herself visible. She'd put a target on her own back to protect a kid she didn't know. Hawk's jaw tightened, and his voice came low, deadly calm. That cop see you? Echo nodded once. Hawk glanced at the men in the room. No words needed. Chairs shifted. Bodies moved. The club woke up like a machine. A blood debt had been born in a truck stop lounge at dawn, and everyone there knew what that meant. Echo had walked into this alone, but she wasn't walking out alone anymore. And from that moment on, there was no going back. Hawk didn't waste time with questions that could wait. The moment his eyes finished mapping Ridge's bruises, his voice dropped into that calm tone men used right before violence. Truck. Now. 2 patched brothers moved first, one opening the door, the other scanning the parking lot like he expected the desert itself to draw a gun. Echo stayed close, the adrenaline still shaking her hands. Ridge tried to walk on his own, jaw clenched, refusing to show weakness, but Hawk caught him under the arm and guided him with a kind of steady grip that said, You don't have to be tough with me. The truck stoplights blurred as they crossed the lot. Diesel engines rumbled. Somewhere in the distance, a siren cried like a warning sent too late. Echo kept looking over her shoulder, expecting Cole's patrol car to return, expecting that polished uniform to appear out of the morning haze. Hawk's brothers surrounded them in a loose formation, not obvious to strangers but clear to anyone who understood protection. Echo had never been protected in her life. It felt unnatural, like wearing someone else's skin. At the hospital, the bright fluorescent lights made everything look harsher. Ridge sat stiff in a chair while nurses asked questions. Hawk answered only what was necessary, voice-controlled, eyes never leaving his son. A patched brother stood by the door, arms folded, blocking the hallway with presence alone. Another lingered at the vending machines, watching reflections in the glass for movement behind them. Echo stayed near the wall, trying to shrink into it, but she couldn't. She was too aware of her dirt-stained clothes, her tangled hair, the way staff glanced at her like she was trouble that had wandered inside. Doc arrived like she belonged there. She wasn't patched like the others, but her aura carried weight. Her hands were steady, and her eyes were sharp in the way of someone who'd seen blood up close and never flinched. She walked straight to Echo, and for a heartbeat, Echo braced, expecting a scolding or suspicion. Instead, Doc gently guided her toward a bathroom and pressed a small bag into her hands. Wipes, soap, a clean shirt, deodorant, a bottle of water. Like it was nothing. Like Echo was worth the effort. "Wash up," Doc said softly. "Drink. Then eat. You look like you've been living on air." Echo swallowed hard. Her throat tightened with something she didn't want to feel. Kindness made her more nervous than threats. Kindness always came with hooks. Doc's voice cut through her thoughts. No hooks, just human. Echo stared at her like she didn't know how to accept that. When Echo came out, her face was cleaner, but her eyes were still hunted. Doc pushed a tray of hospital cafeteria food into her hands and sat her down like she was a patient too. Echo ate like she was afraid someone would take it away, and Doc let her. Hawk's brothers didn't laugh. They didn't stare. They acted like this was normal. Like feeding a stranger mattered. Meanwhile, Hawk handed the disposable camera off to Wire. Wire didn't talk much. He just nodded once, eyes already calculating. He slid the camera into a padded pouch like it was evidence from a murder scene and left without another word. Echo watched him go and felt a chill climb her spine. She'd snapped those photos in panic, but now they were becoming something else. A weapon. A fuse. Hawk stayed close to Ridge until the doctor finished examining him. Ridge needed stitches, needed scans, needed quiet. Every time Ridge winced, Hawk's face darkened, but he stayed controlled. Echo watched that restraint and realized it wasn't softness. It was discipline. The kind that had been trained into him over years of surviving a world that punished impulsive men. When Ridge finally drifted into a medicated sleep, Hawk stepped into the hallway and made a call. His voice was low enough that Echo only caught fragments. "Church, dawn, all officers, full table." Father Iron's name didn't need to be said. The tone in Hawk's voice carried the weight of it. This wasn't a bar conversation. This was club business. Echo sat in a corner chair, knees bouncing, eyes flicking toward every nurse, every security guard, every uniform. Her mind kept replaying the flash of Cole turning around, the way his eyes hunted the shadows. He had seen enough to know someone was there. Echo couldn't shake the fear that he'd return with paperwork and a smile, ready to claim she was a thief, a vagrant, a liar, anything that would make her disappear. Doc noticed. She sat beside Echo and slid a cup of coffee into her hands. "You're shaking," Doc said. Echo tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "I'm not supposed to be involved in stuff like this." Doc tilted her head. "But you are." Echo stared into the coffee like it could answer her. "He'll come for me." Doc didn't deny it. That honesty was worse. "Maybe," Doc said. "But you're not alone." Echo's stomach twisted. She didn't trust those words. She wanted to. She didn't know how. Wire returned before sunrise turned fully into day. He carried a small envelope like it weighed more than it should. Hawk stepped toward him immediately. Wire opened the envelope and laid the prints out on the hallway bench, covering them with his hands until he could show them only to Hawk and Father Iron's designated men. Echo saw Hawk's face change as he studied the pictures. The first photo caught Cole's badge clear as day, pressed into Ridge's chest. The second showed Cole's hand accepting folded cash from a shadowy figure half out of frame. The third captured Ridge's face twisted in pain, blood visible, helpless. The fourth was the worst. Cole's arm raised mid-strike, jaw set, eyes cold, like violence was routine. Echo's breath hitched. The images were sharper than she expected, clearer, more damning. Hawk looked at Echo then, and for the first time, she saw something besides rage in him. Respect. The kind earned, not given. "You did good," Hawk said quietly. Echo's throat tightened again. "He almost caught me." Hawk's voice sharpened. "He won't get that chance again." That promise wasn't comforting. It was a warning wrapped in loyalty. A little later, Gravel arrived. He looked like a man who didn't waste words, wearing clean denim and a jacket that didn't match the biker uniform but still fit the atmosphere, like a blade fit a sheath. His eyes flicked over the photos once and then immediately went to the bigger picture. "This isn't a street problem," Gravel said. "This is a case. We build it right, we bury him federal." Hawk's jaw clenched. "He touched my kid, and if you touch him first, you give his friends in that precinct an excuse to bury you," Gravel replied. Echo expected Hawk to explode. Instead, Hawk listened. That was power too, knowing when violence helped and when it destroyed your own goals. Gravel crouched near Echo, not intimidating, just direct. "You're the witness. That makes you valuable, and that makes you a target. We need your statement clean, consistent, and protected." Echo flinched at the word statement. Statements were how kids like her got labeled liars. Statements were how social workers dismissed you. Doc put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll help." Wire leaned in. "And we'll back it up. Copies. Scans. Cloud storage. Physical prints. If it exists everywhere." Hawk added something the others didn't say out loud. "And if he comes near you, he's near us." The words landed heavy. Echo didn't know if that made her safer or deeper in danger. As the morning brightened, Hawk and his brothers moved Echo to a safe place, an old rental near the clubhouse, quiet, blinds drawn, 2 bikes parked outside like sentries. Echo sat on the edge of a clean couch, feeling like she was trespassing in someone else's life. Dot brought her fresh clothes and made her shower again, as if scrubbing away street grime could also scrub away fear. Ridge, later that day, woke in the hospital and asked for Echo before he asked for anything else. When she sat beside his bed, he looked smaller under the white sheets. "He said my dad would go to prison," Ridge whispered. "He said I'd end up in foster care again. He said he'd make sure nobody believed me." Echo nodded slowly. "He knows how to do it." Ridge swallowed hard. "I saw him take money. Cash. A lot. He told the guy to meet him behind the precinct next time." Echo leaned closer. "Did you hear names?" Ridge hesitated, then nodded. Cole said, "He said a name. Something like a nickname. And the guy called him Sirs, like he owned him." Echo felt the pieces shifting into place. This wasn't just violence. This was corruption. A pipeline, a predator with backing. When she left the hospital, Hawk walked her out. The desert sun was high now, bright and merciless. Echo expected Hawk to offer a warning, maybe a threat, maybe something cold. Instead, Hawk looked at her and said, "You remind me of someone." Echo's stomach tightened. "Who?" Hawk's eyes went distant for half a second. "Me. Long time ago. Same kind of hunger. Same kind of fear." Echo didn't know what to say to that. She just nodded, because anything else would break her open. That night, Cole felt the pressure. Echo didn't see him, but she felt the signs. Patrol cars circling the truck stop. A cruiser parked too long near the rental street. A uniformed officer walking slow past the gas station across from the clubhouse, eyes scanning. Subtle warnings came through the city like poison smoke. A nurse mentioned a cop asking questions. A security guard made a comment about some runaway girl being involved. The rumor was spreading, and Echo realized how fast a badge could turn her into a target. Hawk's brothers tightened security. One stayed outside the rental all night. Another followed Doc's car when she went for supplies. Wired doubled backups, moving files and copies like he was preparing for war. And somewhere out there, Cole was recalculating. He had underestimated a street girl. He had underestimated a biker's son. Now he knew he had a problem. The atmosphere shifted from fear to inevitability. It wasn't a question of whether this would explode. It was only a question of where and when. Echo lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant rumble of motorcycles moving through the night like thunder rolling in. Momentum was building. The club was waking up. The law was circling. Cole was tightening his grip. And every road ahead led toward confrontation. The pressure didn't announce itself all at once. It crept in quietly, like heat seeping through concrete, until Echo realized she hadn't felt truly alone in days, and not in a comforting way. The first time she noticed it, she was riding with Doc to pick up groceries. They had barely pulled away from the curb when Echo caught sight of a patrol car easing into traffic behind them. It stayed back at first, casual, almost lazy. 2 turns later, it was still there. Same distance. Same slow pace. Echo's fingers dug into the seatbelt. Doc didn't look back right away. She waited until they stopped at a light, checked the rearview mirror, then met Echo's eyes. "Breathe," Doc said quietly. "They want you to notice." The cruiser peeled off before the next intersection like it had proven its point and nothing more. But the message stuck. Cole knew where Echo was. Or at least, he wanted her to believe he did. That night, one of Hawk's brothers spotted a man loitering across the street from the rental, pretending to scroll on his phone for too long. When approached, the man left without a word. No confrontation. No threats. Just confirmation. Cole was pushing from the edges now. Wire caught it next. Bank inquiries flagged. Digital access logs lit up with attempted pings on devices tied loosely to Echo's name. Someone was digging through old systems, trying to stitch together a version of her past that could be used against her. Grabble wasn't surprised. "He's looking for leverage," Grabble said during a late-night meeting at the clubhouse. "Or a way to poison the witness." Echo sat at the table, shoulders tight, surrounded by patched men who treated her like she belonged there, even though she still felt like an intruder. Every time Grabble used the word witness, her stomach twisted. It sounded fragile. Temporary. Like something that could be erased with enough pressure. Pressure came fast. One of the civilian witnesses Wire had tracked down, a mechanic Cole had been bleeding dry through fake inspections, called Gravel in a panic. His voice shook so badly, Wire had to put the call on speaker just to understand him. "They came by my shop," the man said. 2 officers. Friendly. Smiling. Asked me if I was having trouble with zoning permits. Said mistakes happen all the time. Said it'd be a shame if my license got suspended. The man's voice dropped to a whisper. "I can't do this. I got kids." The room went silent. Grabble closed his eyes for a moment, then spoke evenly. "You do nothing tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." When the call ended, Hawk's fist slammed into the table hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. No shouting followed. No threats. Just a deep, controlled anger that felt more dangerous than noise. "This is why we don't rush it," Father Iron said calmly from the head of the table. "He's scared now." "Scared men make mistakes. Or bodies," Hawk replied. The debate that followed wasn't loud, but it was intense. Brothers leaned in, voices low, choosing words carefully. Violence would be fast. Satisfying. Final. But it would also light a fuse under the entire charter. Phoenix police would close ranks. Feds would look the other way for just long enough to hurt the club where it lived. Patience felt like swallowing glass. Echo listened, heart pounding, realizing that men were weighing bloodshed on her behalf. The thought terrified her more than Cole's shadow ever had. Then Cole made his boldest move yet. Echo was walking out of a small legal office with Gravel, her statement finally refined and ready when a patrol car rolled up to the curb. Doors opened. 2 officers stepped out. Calm, professional. "Echo," one of them said, smiling, "we need to ask you a few questions." Gravel's body went rigid beside her. "About what?" Echo asked, even though she already knew. "Incident at a truck stop," the officer replied. "Suspicion of theft and obstruction." Echo's vision narrowed. Her chest felt hollow. This was it. This was how it happened. Paperwork. Smiles. Handcuffs. Gravel stepped forward instantly. "She's represented." The officer nodded politely. "Of course." "This won't take long." Hawk's truck screeched to a stop across the street before the officer could finish the sentence. The door opened. Hawk stepped out, eyes locked on the scene. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just stood there, presence heavy enough to bend the moment. Phones came out. Someone started recording. The officers hesitated. They hadn't planned on witnesses. After a tense exchange, the patrol car pulled away, leaving Echo shaking on the sidewalk. Gravel exhaled slowly. "That," he said, "was almost the end of us." Echo slid down onto the steps, hands trembling uncontrollably now. Hawk crouched in front of her, bringing himself down to eye level. "He won't get another shot like that," Hawk said. Echo laughed weakly. You sound sure. Hawk's gaze softened, just a fraction. I'm done letting men like him decide where kids end up. That night, Hawk finally told her why. They sat outside the clubhouse after midnight, the desert air cooler, bikes lined up like steel animals at rest. Hawk stared out at the dark road as he spoke, not looking at her. I was raised by the system, he said. Different homes. Different rules. Same ending. You learn early that nobody's coming for you unless you make your own family. Echo listened, heart tight. I watched kids disappear, Hawk continued. Not die, just vanish. Paperwork closed, files lost. Nobody asking questions. He finally looked at her then. That's why kids are off limits. Always. Doesn't matter what patch you wear. Doesn't matter what side you're on. Hurt a child and you're done. Echo understood now. It wasn't just Ridge. It was history. It was ghosts. The next morning, Father Iron made the call Hawk had been avoiding. The man who walked into the clubhouse didn't wear leather. He wore a suit. His eyes were Hawk's eyes, sharpened by a different kind of discipline. Blood family. They stood facing each other in silence for a long moment before either spoke. You look like hell, the man said. Hawk snorted. You look like a badge. The tension broke, but the weight didn't. The agent listened to everything. The photos. The money trail. The intimidation. The attempted arrest. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight. This goes federal, he said. But you touch Cole before we move, and you burn the case. Hawk nodded once. Then move. The clock sped up after that. Cole sensed it. Wire caught chatter about sudden transfers, emergency leave requests. A passport application flagged late at night. Cole wasn't planning to fight this. He was planning to vanish the way he'd made others vanish. Witnesses were locked down. Protection doubled. Echo barely slept, every noise feeling final. Ridge was moved to a safer location, watched over by brothers who treated the job like a vow. Every decision now felt like stepping onto ice that could crack at any moment. Echo stood at the center of it all, no longer invisible, no longer disposable. She had become a fixed point in a storm of power, law, and vengeance. And everyone knew there was no undoing what had already been set in motion. The only thing left was to see who would break first. The warrants came through just after dawn, when the city was still rubbing sleep from its eyes and the desert air hadn't yet turned cruel. Federal seals. Multiple counts. Enough paper to finally pin a man who had spent years hiding behind a badge. The word moved fast, not through phones, but through engines. The Hell's Angels didn't ride angry. They rode deliberate. Nearly 200 bikes rolled out in waves, chrome catching the early light, engines thundering low and steady like a heartbeat the city couldn't ignore. No revving for show, no chaos. Just presence. Leather and steel cutting through Phoenix streets with purpose, moving as one toward the police headquarters that had protected Cole for far too long. People stopped what they were doing. Coffee cups froze mid-air. Traffic slowed, heads turned. This wasn't a threat, it was a statement. We are watching. Inside the building, tension snapped tight. Word spread through the precinct, faster than any radio call. Officers glanced toward windows, toward the doors, toward the weight pressing in from outside. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked afraid. A few looked relieved. Cole felt it before he saw it. He was halfway down a hallway when the first federal agents stepped into his path. Calm. Professional. No raised voices. No drama. Derek Cole, one of them said. You're under arrest. Cole laughed at first. He actually laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. He started to say something about jurisdiction, about mistakes, about lawyers who owed him favors. Then he saw them. Through the glass doors at the front of the building, the bikes lined the street, row after row. Engines idling, riders unmoving. Faces hidden behind sunglasses and helmets, patches unmistakable. Cole's smile collapsed. They cuffed him there, in full view of the lobby. Cameras appeared from nowhere. Phones lifted. Someone started recording. This wasn't going to be quiet. This wasn't going to be buried. As they walked him out, Cole twisted his head, scanning faces like a drowning man searching for air. That's when he saw Echo. She stood behind a line of agents, smaller than everyone around her, wearing clean clothes that still didn't quite feel like hers. Her hands were clasped tight in front of her, knuckles white. She didn't hide. She didn't look away. Cole's eyes locked on her, and something ugly rose up from deep inside him. "She's a liar," he shouted, voice cracking. "She's a homeless nobody. You can't trust her. She stole that camera. She's making it up." The words echoed in the lobby, desperate and loud. Echo felt them hit like stones, each one aimed at the softest parts of her. Old fears surged. Old labels. Runaway. Foster trash. Invisible. Then Grabble stepped forward. "So noted," Grabble said calmly. "Along with the photographs, the money trail, the witness statements, the attempted intimidation, and the recorded patrol activity from your friends." Cole's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The agents kept moving. Outside, the city held its breath. The doors opened, and Cole stepped into the sunlight in cuffs, blinking like he'd never seen daylight before. The sound hit him next. Engines, deep and rumbling. A wall of noise that wasn't angry, but wasn't forgiving either. Hawk stood at the front of the line, feet planted, arms relaxed at his sides. He didn't step forward. He didn't speak. He just watched. For a split second, Cole's eyes met Hawk's. This was the moment Cole had prepared for his whole career. The moment a man like Hawk would lose control, rush him, end it in blood. That's how Cole justified everything he did. He needed monsters to prove he wasn't one. Hawk didn't move. The restraint landed harder than any punch. Federal agents guided Cole into the transport vehicle. The door closed with a final, heavy sound. Cameras flashed. Sirens wailed, not in warning, but in procession. The vehicle pulled away. The engines of the bikes never changed pitch. No chase, no roar. Just steady presence until the transport disappeared down the street. Only then did Hawk turn. He walked to Echo slowly, not towering, not intimidating. Just a father who had seen too much. He stopped in front of her and studied her face like he was making sure she was still real. "You good?" he asked. Echo swallowed. Her voice came out thin. "I think so." Hawk nodded once. "That's enough for now." Around them, the moment rippled outward. Brothers relaxed shoulders they hadn't realized were tight. Agents exchanged looks of something close to respect. Bystanders whispered. Phones buzzed as footage spread faster than truth ever had before. Father Irons stepped up beside Hawk. "You did the right thing." Hawk exhaled slowly. "Didn't feel like it." "It never does," Father Irons said. "That's how you know it mattered." Across the street, Ridge watched from a car window, safe and guarded, eyes fixed on the scene. He saw his father not attack, not lose himself. He saw strength that didn't need violence to prove itself. Doc stood with Echo, a hand steady on her back. "This is the part where it feels unreal," she murmured. "It'll hit later." Echo nodded. She felt hollow and full at the same time, like something old had finally cracked open. Cole's words still echoed in her head, but they didn't own her anymore. Not here, not now. The federal agent, the one tied to Hawk by blood, watched the bikes with a careful expression. "You kept them in line," he said quietly. Hawk met his gaze. "I kept my word." As the agents dispersed and the bikes slowly began to peel away one by one, the city exhaled. Traffic resumed. People went back to work. Phoenix absorbed the shock the way it absorbed everything else, slowly, stubbornly. But something fundamental had shifted. Cole had walked out of that building in cuffs, exposed not by bullets or fists, but by proof and witnesses who refused to disappear. The uniform had failed him. The silence he depended on was gone. Echo stood where she had once hidden, fully visible now, and didn't shrink. Hawk watched her for a long moment, then turned back toward his brothers, his son, his road. Every one of them would carry this moment forward. Justice hadn't roared. It had stood still and let the world see it. The conviction came months later, quiet compared to the arrest, but heavier in its finality. Federal court didn't move fast, but it moved thorough. Evidence stacked high and clean. Photographs. Financial records. Witnesses who didn't disappear this time. The uniform that once protected Cole did nothing for him under oath. When the sentence was read, there was no shouting, no drama. Just the sound of a gavel and a man realizing the system he abused had finally turned its full weight on him. Prison took him where threats and badges meant nothing. Ridge sat in the gallery beside Hawk, hands folded, jaw tight. He was healing, but not untouched. The bruises faded, the stitches came out. Sleep came easier again. But something in his eyes had changed. He'd learned too early that authority could lie, that safety wasn't guaranteed by symbols. Hawk saw it every time Ridge scanned a room before sitting down. Every time he stiffened when a siren passed. Hawk didn't try to take that awareness away. He taught Ridge how to live with it without letting it harden him. Hawk's name carried more weight after the trial, though he never spoke about it. In the club, nothing changed on the surface. Same meetings. Same rules. Same discipline. But outside the clubhouse, people looked twice now. Not because of fear, but because of what hadn't happened. No retaliation. No bloodbath. No excuse for a crackdown. Father Iron had seen to that personally, guiding every step with patience and restraint, keeping the charter clean while the world watched closely for mistakes. Law enforcement attention eventually drifted elsewhere, unsatisfied by the lack of chaos. The club endured, exactly as Father Iron intended. Quietly, legally intact. Untouched. Echo's life changed in ways that still felt unreal to her months later. The first night she slept in her own room with a door that locked and a bed that belonged to her, she didn't sleep at all. She lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of someone telling her it was temporary. Waiting for the catch. It never came. Paperwork moved. Programs opened. Classes started. Echo learned that the world treated you differently when you had an address and a schedule. She learned that hunger didn't have to dictate your thoughts. That fear loosened its grip when tomorrow wasn't a question mark. She kept the camera, not the disposable one. That stayed locked away, a relic of the night everything cracked open. But Hawk made sure she got a real camera. Not new, not fancy, but solid, honest. Something built to last. Echo found purpose through the lens. She photographed people most others walked past. The elderly man who fed pigeons every morning. The single mother working nights and mornings without rest. The kid sitting alone at a bus stop with too much anger and nowhere to put it. She learned how to frame dignity where the world expected shame, how to make invisible lives visible without exploiting them. The city noticed, slowly, a small exhibit. A local feature. Conversations started where silence used to live. Phoenix didn't transform overnight, but it shifted. Just enough. The crack in the system didn't collapse it, but light came through. Oversight tightened. Complaints were taken seriously for once. A few more officers resigned quietly. A few more investigations opened. It wasn't justice for everyone. But it was something. Echo stayed close to the club, though she never pretended to be something she wasn't. She didn't ride. She didn't patch. She didn't sit at the table. Hawk never offered, and she never asked. One evening, months after the trial, Hawk found her outside the clubhouse, camera resting on her knee as the sun dipped low and painted the desert gold. Ridge was nearby, laughing with a couple of brothers who treated him like a nephew, not a liability. Hawk stood beside her for a while without speaking. "You ever miss being invisible?" he asked. Echo thought about it. About the safety of shadows. About the cost. "No," she said finally. "I miss not being scared, but I don't miss being unseen." Hawk nodded. Fair. She hesitated, then said the thing that had been sitting in her chest for weeks. "I don't know how to thank you." Hawk looked at her, really looked at her, like he had that first morning in the lounge. "You already did," he said. "You showed up." He paused, then added, "Your family here." Don't confuse that with ownership. It just means you're not alone. Echo swallowed hard. No papers, no ceremony. No conditions. Family. As the engines fired up behind them and the night settled in, Echo lifted her camera and captured the moment without flash. Just light. Just truth. and for the first time in her life she didn't feel like she was waiting to disappear. The truth that lingered after everything settled was uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. Evil didn't survive because it was strong. It survived because people looked away, because silence was easier than risk, because most damage happened in places where no one bothered to watch. One girl changed the outcome, not by force, but by refusing to turn her eyes from something ugly and pretending it wasn't her problem. Brotherhood revealed itself in quieter ways than most people expected. It wasn't about fear, patches, or the sound of engines rolling through the streets. It was about who showed up when someone was bleeding and stayed when things got complicated. It was about restraint when violence would have been easier. Protection instead of pride. The story twisted expectations in ways that made people uncomfortable. The man in leather protected a child. The man in uniform threatened one. Appearances lied, the way they often do, and the truth lived in actions instead of symbols. Courage didn't arrive wearing muscle or authority. It looked like a broke foster kid with a cheap camera and nowhere safe to stand. It looked like shaking hands pressing a shutter button anyway. It looked like choosing visibility when invisibility would have kept her alive. And sometimes that choice is enough to break something that was never supposed to be untouchable. Loyalty is never proven by what people say when it's easy. It's proven in the moments when silence feels safer, when walking away would cost nothing, and when showing up could cost everything. This story isn't about bikers or badges. It's about the choice to stand when someone else is being crushed. If this story hit you, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who understands what loyalty really means. And tell me this: if you were standing in those shadows that night, would you have stayed hidden, or would you have raised the camera? Let the sound of engines idle in the distance, steady and watchful, as the road fades to black.